House Bill 4086 relating to unemployment benefits of individuals who are unemployed due to lockouts and declaring an emergency.
Question now rises upon third reading and final passage of House Bill 4086. Representative Rayfield, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in August, I had an opportunity to learn about an issue that was affecting a community near mine. It was a lockout affecting 180 workers, and in fact, many of those folks are here today in the gallery, if everybody would like to wave and say hello. That is local, Steelworkers Local 7150. This lockout was occurring, and I and my legislative director decided to take some time to go meet with everybody and walk the picket line. And what I think is important for everybody to note, Mr. Speaker, is that lockout workers are very different than workers that are on a strike. Locked out workers are folks that want to work, but they can't because their employer has not allowed them to come back into their place of employment during a labor negotiation. And so Zach Baker in my office, we went down and met with everybody and it's down on the picket line. It was a little bit awkward because none of these folks knew who the heck I was. And I just show up randomly, Zach and I think we were in, goofy shorts, and we start talking to people, about what was going on, trying to learn a little bit more. And I think they were a little bit reluctant to talk about some of the personal issues that they were experiencing. One of the first things that I learned is that locked out workers in Oregon receive 6 months of unemployment benefits. And unemployment benefits only provide about 40 to 50% of your income when you are actually working. And so we heard many stories from all of the folks that you see here in the gallery today about how this was impacting their lives, about how you have a fixed budget that is based upon your full wage for your house, for your car, for your food, for your family. And when you make a significant cut like that, it put an extreme economic strain on many of these families, and several of them opened up, and later on more would open up when we had these hearings, and it was probably one of the most touching hearings that I have been a part of. And so the other thing that we started to learn as we were walking through, talking to everybody, I would just ask, well, is there anything we can do to help? And several folks mentioned to me that, yes, we're fearful that come 6 months, this lockout is still going to be occurring. And we're fearful that we're going to lose our unemployment benefits. And if you think that it's tough now, operating your family on a 40 or 50% of your income, imagine when you lose absolutely everything. And at the time, Mr. Speaker, I honestly didn't have the knowledge base to answer the question of which was, can we extend unemployment benefits? And so we spent a lot of time looking at this issue because locked out workers are very unique. The other thing that I found out in talking with everybody is that locked out workers are not like regular folks that are unemployed. When you lose 40 to 50% of your income, there's an incentive to find alternative employment. And in fact, many of the folks in the gallery today tried to find other employment, but they could not, because the prospective employer reviewing the application would eventually ask, are you going to return to your original employment when the labor negotiation is concluded? And of course, the answer is absolutely. These are family wage jobs that provide benefits. In fact, many of the benefits are vested. And so, of course, you're naturally going to return. So this prospective employer looks at you and says, well, I don't want to make an investment in you. And they don't hire. And so the locked out worker is placed in this state of limbo where they're getting 40 to 50% of their income, but they can't find alternative employment. And then 6 months down the road, they lose all of their income, and they still can't find employment. And that's what this bill is about. This bill extends locked out unemployment benefits from 6 months to 12 months for all of these workers, as well as future locked out workers. Because what we realized is it's not just the local 7150 here. It's not just them. This is about future locked out workers, because they're going to be no different. They're going to be placed in that same limbo that all of the folks here today have been placed in. And so this bill takes it from 6 months to 12 months, and it helps take care of these families, because I think it's extremely important to note that their benefits ran 2 weeks ago. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask everybody's support on this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Further conversation, co-carrier Representative Olson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues and guests. Perspective is everything. It really is. I mean, generally, I got to tell you, I appreciate my co-carrier with this, the representative from Corvallis, Philomath. We've had some serious discussion regarding this whole issue. And at one time, probably in my life, I would have been opposed to this. But when you have an incident that occurs in your backyard and you start seeing friends and neighbors and families that are struggling with what is occurring with them, you have to get on board with them. And that's my perspective today, that I would be very supportive of this bill, given that fact. To visit with folks that you attend church with, you see people in a grocery store, you receive emails and phone calls at length about it. It causes a whole different perspective. So that's where I'm at. At the same time, I look back at where I had come from an opposition perspective. I understand that view too as well. It might not be in your backyard. Most definitely is in mine. So I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Barreto, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bill?
To the bill.
Thank you.
Colleagues, this was a tough issue in business and labor. I think most of us on this side anguished over this issue. It is a hardship on these folks that are out of work, but it's also an issue with the NLRB. It's an issue with unions and laborers. The strike is something that the employers have over the employer. The lockout is something that the employer has over the employee. And it's not an easy issue, and I feel like we're in the middle of this. I was a no on this to begin with, and then in the committee, we knew it was Representative Olson's bill, and he was not available to seek counsel on, and so I think as a group we decided to vote yes on this. Everyone has their viewpoint on it. Everyone has their vote, and their vote is their own. I'm going to be a no here on the floor, just because I think, as I expressed in committee, we wanted to see a sunset on this. We were not going to get that. This is nothing that I would like to see on a permanent basis, and yet I certainly understand the hardship that these workers are in through no fault of their own. This is not just a local thing either, and that also makes it difficult because it's I think there's 6 states involved, if I'm not mistaken, so it's a 6 statewide issue. But anyway, I was a yes in committee. I'm a no here on the floor, and I wanted to express why. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Doherty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
I'd like to explain just a couple of things. I think the one thing, and first of all, I'm very much in favor of this bill. And the one thing about a lockout is used very, very rarely. But so is a strike. And I think the one thing you have to realize from the employee standpoint, for somebody to take a vote on a strike is a very, very personal, and it's a very, very hard thing to do. And so that's why we have very, very few strikes in the state of Oregon, is we usually work together to try to come up with settlements and so on. But the one thing on the national level with lockouts is this is almost kind of becoming kind of a national movement. The National Labor Relations Board ruled against ATI because they said that they had actually started to hire employees before they locked their current their real hardworking employees out. They had gotten kind of a backlog of supplies and materials and things that were already made. And the thing about this is they did all of this stuff before they even sat down to the bargaining table. The same thing is happening with Nabisco, is that Nabisco is hiring replacement workers, for a better word, and they have not even sat down with their union yet to talk about what the terms of the agreement are. And so this is a national movement, and the idea of, well, we'll just lock them out and we'll just wait long enough so their benefits run out. This is where it's so important here, and it's not only that, I mean, thankfully there is a tentative agreement, but a tentative agreement is exactly that. These ladies and gentlemen are not getting any unemployment benefits and they're not going to be able to go back to work until the tentative agreement has been ratified by both parties. And that may be a month or so down the road. And so luckily they have a tentative agreement, but they're still not getting a paycheck because the tentative agreement has not been ratified for both parties. So I strongly strongly urge you to support this bill, because it's not only supporting our workers, our very hard workers in Oregon, but it's also sending a message to other corporations. Don't hire replacement workers before you've even sat down at the bargaining table.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hoyle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To the bill.
To the bill.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm going to be a yes vote for this today, and I know that in this chamber we have differing opinions about unions and about organizing, but this bill specifically addresses workers who have been locked out. These are workers, men and women, who want to get up, who want to go to work. This isn't about a voluntary strike, and I do support a worker's right to strike, but this is about workers who have been locked out of their job through no fault of their own. Now, the NLRB ruled that this was a lockout, that this was unfair. At the end of the day, these men and women live in our communities, whether it's Albany or whether it's another part of the state at a different time. They live in our communities, they go to our churches, they volunteer in our schools, their families live here, and they deserve to be able to feed their families, to pay their mortgages, and they deserve to be able to get up every day and go to work. And when they're prevented from doing that, I believe an extension of these benefits is the least that we can do. Again, these are people who are spending their money in our communities, and I'm looking forward to the day when they can walk back in those doors, where they can do an honest day's work, and I'm hoping that ATI will allow that to happen soon. But whether it's ATI or another company, I think this is the right thing to do, and I would not support a sunset, and I respect everyone's opinion, but I would urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Widener, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I was yes in committee as well, but I would have liked to seen a sunset on this. And when I mentioned that to the chair, he got very aggravated and said there shouldn't be anything and we should do things to punish businesses like this, and would like to make it for 2 years. And to me, this is a situation where we are just dealing with one company. And for the record...
Excuse me, Representative Buckley, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Mr. Speaker, the comments attributed to the chair of Business and Labor Committee, I think, are unacceptable to actually put into that kind of thing in the record. I just find it to be totally unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative, please confine your comments to the merits of the bill. Please continue.
Mr. Speaker, those comments were basically comments that were made in committee during the committee at that time. So that's why I spoke to him at that point. So,
excuse me just a moment. Representative Springer, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect, I'm curious which rule we're referencing when we have these objections. Typically, it's impugning the motives, and that clearly was not what was done. Do we know which rule here that is concerning us?
Representative, I just asked the representative to confine his comments to the content of the bill. Representative Buckley, you're in the privilege queue again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify, it was the phrase used by the speaker that the chair of Business and Labor said he wished to punish businesses, which I don't believe is on the record. If the representative wants to go back to the tape and find a recording of the chair of Business and Labor saying he wishes to punish businesses, that would be, I think, one way to go about it. But given that I don't believe that does exist on the tape, I would just ask that the character of the chair not be impugned.
Representative Widener, please continue.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, colleagues, due to comments that I heard when I was in committee and everything, kind of changed where I was at on this bill. And it's also one of the things that I think unions, when we're dealing with a situation like this, where they need to look at when you're taking in those contributions monthly, that you should be storing those up and saving money for when a lockout or a strike happens, so you can support the workers. Lots of times you'll run into where a union president or different groups, they'll burn through a lot of this cash that they're collecting each month from their members. And those member dues should be there to help the members. The member dues should be there to take care of a member maybe that gets sick and has to go off work. When they go on strike, it should be there to support all the members when they go on strike. So as union leadership, they need to decide how they're going to do this. And we're asking other people to pick up the tab. I would support this if we had a sunset on this bill, because I feel for the pain of these workers and what they're doing. They tried to get to where they needed to, but the problem is this is something that's going on at a national level that is bigger than what's happening here in Oregon. So I was for helping them out. But I think this speaks a lot to union leadership and what they should be doing with the funds, the dues that they collect, because they could save up a lot of money to help their members instead of throwing it into a lot of political races and things like that. The dollars should be saved to help union employees on rainy days, not be used to fund campaigns. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Boone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I have been asked in the past to weigh in on labor discussions, et cetera, and I've pretty much stepped back from it and let the people whose job that is to do. But this is something, this could happen in any of our districts. And my colleagues in Albany and Corvallis and Philomath have brought this forth again for us to consider, and we've made it this far, and we've now heard that not only are these workers locked out, but it's done, it's over. There's no more money coming in. They're not getting their salaries, and for whatever reason, how people spend their money, it's not my business, but I assume they spend it taking care of their families by paying for housing, food, clothing, etc., and maybe a little vacation now and then. Maybe they save a little bit every month to take that summer vacation or winter vacation. But I think this is something we need to do to support. I'm assuming the people up in the gallery are from this company. Raise your hand if you are. See how many there are here, and welcome to your capital. So I would ask for concurrence on this and a healthy yes vote to help these people maintain their living standards so they don't become homeless, they don't end up taking out loans or using their savings when they really need them later on whatever it is they need. I'm not the person to tell you how to use your money. This is not your fault. This is something we can do now, and I hope we can do this. Please support this bill.
Representative Springer, for what purpose in your privilege queue, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we involve the audience in our debate on the floor?
Representative, it is not appropriate to do that. Thank you for the inquiry. Representative Hurd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I'm going to be brief here.
To the bill?
Yes, to the bill.
Thank you.
I sit on House Business and Labor, and I was an enthusiastic yes, actually, in committee on this bill. And I would be an enthusiastic yes today if we had the sunset. I'm disappointed that we were not willing to work that out. I just want to bring up here on the stock exchange that ATI in 2006, so 10 years ago, had a $112-ish per share value. When we hit the recession of 2008, it fell to around $20 a share. A month ago, they were at $11 a share. They've bounced back up to around 20 a share. This is a company that clearly has some financial problems. I'm assuming there's probably great pressure and competition from foreign countries. So it gets us back to safety for our employees' jobs. So that's just one of the things I think we need to consider. We talked about the difference between a lockout and a strike. Both of them are mechanisms for opposite teams to have leverage on the other in a negotiation. It was clear to me from the testimony that this company has, or I should say, that the employees up in the gallery have made several concessions in their benefits package over the past several years to try to negotiate a mutually beneficial situation between them and their employer. So I applaud them for that. And I absolutely feel terrible for the situation they're in right now, because they are in a difficult problem financially. But I think what we're doing here by not allowing there to be a sunset, because it was brought up by another member that this happens it's an extremely rare situation. Well, it seems to me that it would be logical then that we could then approach this from a case-by-case basis. Just like these good folks who took the time to come in and testify to us in the committee to tell us why their situation is deserving of an extension of these benefits, which I support. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by not allowing the sunset to be a part of this, because frankly, this company is clearly in financial trouble, and I just hope that they can work things out to where both the company and consequently the employees have a good ongoing job situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mike McLean, please.
To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I was a no in Ways and Means, wasn't familiar with the bill. I've since researched it, and I tell you why I was a no initially and why I'm going to be yes now after learning more about the bill. This bill is tainted by what happened at Terminal 6, and that has been a disaster for the state. The private labor union in that situation has not only been found to be liable for breaking the law, but I don't think I've found anyone who will defend their behavior. So when we are intervening as a state into private labor disputes, we should be very cautious. In fact, my rule of thumb is we shouldn't do it because that is one at least semblance of adversarial relationship, which is the key to collective bargaining, having both sides balanced and the power balanced. This situation, having been briefed by the representative from Albany and others, does not involve bad behavior on behalf of the union. There was no slowdown and the like. So in this respect, I suppose extending as opposed to intervention, extending what we already do is an appropriate policy decision. And so I'm going to support it for that instance. And again, close call, but colleagues, let's remember that the balance has to be maintained for collective bargaining to function. And when it becomes out of balance, it becomes incredibly dysfunctional. And at least in private collective bargaining, we have balance still maintained in certain sectors. I'll confine my comments to the scope of this bill and leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Holvey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I, as Chair of Business and Labor, just want to put on the record that I never said that I wanted to punish businesses in this case. And the reason also, Mr. Speaker, that I was not in favor of putting a sunset on this bill, because when we first passed this legislation in 2007, to extend unemployment benefits to locked out workers, we had no vision that a lockout situation like is being experienced by the steel workers would go beyond 26 weeks. It has now been proven that it does and may, in fact, in the future. And therefore, since it has, and it happens in the past very rarely, but when it does happen, this unemployment insurance is extremely important for those locked out workers. I wish we could have passed this bill a month ago so that they didn't experience a lapse in their unemployment insurance. And one thing I did say in committee is that perhaps we should consider companies that lock out workers passing legislation that would require them to pay their mortgage payments as well for these workers. That was not meant to be a punishment on business, but clearly to recognize that these workers are challenged to keep their homes, keep their families intact, and keep their lifestyle intact going forward. This is an extremely important bill. I urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Nose, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I would just point out that this bill is not about union dues or union funds. Just as strikes are rare, as we have heard, lockouts are rare as well. And the lockout, frankly, is a tactic that the company, ATI, is using in a dispute over the next contract that is being bargained or attempted to being bargained as we speak. ATI is doing well financially. We heard that in committee. The concessions that the employer, ATI, wants, in my opinion, are beyond the pale of what is reasonable and good given their financial situation and what the workers are seeking. And the union is willing to bargain. Rather than come to the table, though, and bargain fairly, the company is utilizing the lockout tactic, rarely used, to try to leverage the process to get concessions from the workers and probably have them work non-union. These workers are working for a profitable company. They're willing to bargain. They obviously reached a tentative agreement. All right? They want to keep their union and have their pay and benefits not be completely denigrated. Please vote yes on this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Kennemer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Mr. Speaker and colleagues, I found the testimony in Business and Labor to be most helpful. I think this is a very unusual situation and an extraordinary one, and one in which it seemed to me the balance was in favor of making an exception. And that's why I supported the bill in committee and strongly supported it on the floor and urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Rayfield, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I just wanted to say thank you to the representative from Albany. He's spent time on the picket line. He's spent time with me working this bill. In fact, a lot of the bills that we've worked on together this session, I've really enjoyed the opportunity I've had to build a relationship with him and his community, as well as, quite frankly, many of the folks, as you heard today, who've across the aisle that are sticking their neck out on a bill like this, which is traditionally something where sometimes people feel a little bit goofy about. And so I want to appreciate everybody who's supporting this bill today, and also to some of the folks that disagree with the bill. You both have presented some good logic for why you believe that. Specifically, I wanted to address two things, which is number one, the sunset. You heard a lot of people, Mr. Speaker, talk about maybe we should put a sunset on this. And I really want to make sure that the record's very clear that a locked-out worker is a locked-out worker. Whether that's now or whether that's 10 years from now, these are folks that are not going to be able to find a job, or it's extremely difficult to find a job, and after 6 months, they will be experiencing extreme financial hardship. I also think it's very important to note, as one representative mentioned, that there is hardship placed on the employer, or there's various negotiating tools. And what I wanted to make really clear for the record is that even with unemployment benefits, these families are experiencing a cut of 50 to 60% of their wages, even with unemployment benefits. So this is not a pretty picture, even with unemployment benefits. And I think that really has to be made clear. And I also want to thank the folks who've come here today from the Local 7150 for bringing me into their community, working with us on this bill, and being patient with this body as we've worked as hard as we can to get this bill through. I naturally have a connection to Albany. My wife was raised there. My wife's family lives there, and I have my law office. And so I was very taken in by a lot of these stories. It's a community that means a lot to me, and I know that it means a tremendous amount to the representative from Albany. So with that said, Mr. Speaker, I would urge everyone to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. In order to preserve decorum in the House, I just want to make the reiterated announcement that we don't express satisfaction or dissatisfaction with any particular outcome. After we take the vote, we'll move on to the next bill, but please keep that in mind. Those who are of the opinion that the bill should pass will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk, please open the voting system. Representative Clem, how do you vote? Representative Clem? Is off the floor. House Bill 4086, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed.